Hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for a complete summary of A Clash of Kings. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. If you want a complete refresher on the second book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, A Clash of Kings, without having to go through the arduous process, although still fun, process of having to read this nearly 1,000-page book, then this video is for you. Also, if you've never read the book and just want to look cool in front of your friends that like, oh yeah, I definitely read that series, then this video is also for you, as I will be going as in-depth as I can, whilst trying to keep the video under an hour, on all the events that happen within A Clash of Kings. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because we're about to go out into the field and go full-bore spoilers on this book, which includes spoilers from the first Game of Thrones book and spoilers for the follow-up books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. Like, comment, and subscribe to support a small channel and help me beat the evil YouTube algorithm. So before we dive into the summary of A Clash of Kings, there's something important I forgot to mention in my summary of A Game of Thrones, and that's the unique way seasons work in Planetos. Unlike our real-world seasons, the seasons in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe can last anywhere from a single year to over a decade. They're unpredictable and the lengths vary from cycle to cycle. For context, the events of A Game of Thrones unfold over a little more than a year, all set during the late summer. Imagine mid-September in the Northern Hemisphere, but extended over an entire year. A Clash of Kings, however, starts and takes place throughout early fall. Think of October, but stretched over about 9 months. Now, the reason seasons are so important in this world is that unlike in our real world, where a harsh winter might last 4 to 6 months at worst, a winter in Planetos can last an entire generation. Growing crops and stockpiling food to survive such a long winter is a massive challenge. This is why everyone is so cautious about the coming winter, and why the Starks frequently remind us, winter is coming. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's start this video. Alright, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got the map of Westeros and Essos here running up again, just like we did with the first Game of Thrones summary video. Just a couple of reminders, guys. Although I have read this book twice before, the last time I read A Clash of Kings was about 3 years ago, so although I do have a pretty good recollection of pretty much everything that happened within this book, I may get some things wrong here and there, so if I do, just kindly correct me on the things that I may have gotten wrong. I ask that you please be polite and constructive about this, guys. This took a lot of work to make, so I really appreciate if you could kind of give me some grace here. So when we last left off in the events of A Game of Thrones, the big thing that happened in the previous book was the death of our main character, Ned Stark. Ned Stark being the big family man, the honorable man from House Stark, who was kind of holding the events of the story together, holding the family and holding really the events of A Game of Thrones together. And now, because he has died, the North is pretty much in open rebellion. And then we've also got a couple other kings here, predominantly King Stannis, the one true king here in Dragonstone, who has declared himself king, similar to Renly Baratheon, who we were introduced to in the previous book. He has also declared himself to be king of Westeros. In addition to Robb Stark, who has decided to also be the king in the North, who is going against the Lannister rule, as most of these other characters are. And so, yeah, we've got all these kings. This book predominantly encapsulates the events known as the War of the Five Kings. It is a brutal war that spans this book and the next book, A Storm of Swords, and it is hella interesting, as we're about to get to. Now, one thing I should make mention of about A Clash of Kings when compared to A Game of Thrones is that unlike A Game of Thrones that was more of a focused narrative that predominantly follows Ned Stark and him investigating the murder mystery of Jon Arryn in King's Landing, A Clash of Kings is a little bit less focused in its storytelling abilities. It's more fragmented as a story, which is not to say that it's a bad book. It's just a different book than A Game of Thrones. It's a different style of storytelling. And personally, for me, in my subjective opinion, I prefer the more focused narrative of the first A Game of Thrones book than I do of the second A Clash of Kings book. In addition to that, there's a lot more meandering going around here in A Clash of Kings that wasn't really present in A Game of Thrones. In A Game of Thrones, we did have, Tyrion traveling here and there between the Eyrie and the Riverlands and King's Landing. So there was a little bit of that in Winterfell, but it was more focused. There was a method to the madness, as opposed to A Clash of Kings, where you have a lot more meandering going around. You have Characters like Jon Snow just kind of meandering around north of the Wall. You have characters like Daenerys Targaryen just kind of meandering around the Dothraki Sea and the Red Waste. It's just not my cup of tea, personally speaking, but it's still a good book in my opinion. It's still a great book. I just personally, in my opinion, think it falls short compared to the debut Game of Thrones book. So with all that out of the way, let's get started on the summary proper. So we actually begin our story here with the prologue in Dragonstone, as we're introduced to a character who will really only see the light of day for this one chapter, called Maester Cresson, as he narrates the events of what is going on Dragonstone, as Stannis has declared himself King of Westeros. Obviously, with the death of Robert Baratheon, the next in line heir, if we're going by the traditional sense, is his children. However, because Robert Baratheon's children, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, are an open secret, pretty much bastard children and not Robert Baratheon's legitimate heirs, then the next person in line for the Iron Throne, the seat at King's Landing that rules over all of Westeros, goes to his younger brother. And the next in line would then be Stannis Baratheon, which I agree. Stannis Baratheon should be the King of Westeros. All of this could have been avoided, guys, if we just made Stannis king, but whatever. I guess everyone in this story had their own ideas of what they wanted to do. But anyway, we're introduced to the character of Stannis, who is a very, he's introduced in a very not nice light. Throughout this entire book, this Clash of Kings book, we see Stannis as kind of a little bit of a villain. And we're not going to talk too much about the Game of Thrones TV show adaptation. I'll try not to mention it too much, but I will say that season 2 of the TV show definitely starts to deviate from the source material quite a bit, and not in a good way. And one of the deviations that they do is they change the character of Stannis. So Stannis Baratheon, within the confines of the book series, he is a very pragmatic individual, someone who is serious. He is defined by his honor, even more so than Ned Stark, to an almost unrelenting degree. So whenever Robert Baratheon dies, he's like, well, I'm the next in line, not because I want to be king, but because it is what is tradition. It is what needs to happen. Like, my older brother died, so I have to be the king. And there's no one else that can do it. I have to do it. It has to be me. I don't want it, but it has to be me. Whereas show Stannis is more like, oh, I want to be king because I belong on the Iron Throne and I'm the best for the job, which is sort of similar to book Stannis. But again, there is that difference there where Stannis is a little bit more layered here in the book. He's less stubborn in the book. In addition to that, book Stannis, as we'll get to here shortly, has a shadowy, mysterious kind of quote-unquote evil woman under his payroll, and that being Melisandre, this shadow witch who came from Ashai. She uses blood fiery magic to do just all sorts of feats and tasks, and everyone here on Dragonstone is kind of wary of this shadowy witch, this person who all of a sudden showed up under Stannis' payroll and is doing great things for Stannis in terms of getting him, victories here and there, but she, no one really trusts her. No one really trusts all the dark magic, but the reason I bring her up, in addition to her being a new character within the series, is that in the show, Stannis is kind of under Melisandre's thumb. He is more about, like R'hllor, the Lord of Light. We all believe in the Lord of Light, and we have to follow Melisandre, and that way she can crown me as king. Whereas in the book, again, in my opinion, a more layered version of the character, Stannis is the one who has the decision making. He is not under Melisandre's thumb. Melisandre is under his thumb. He seeks Melisandre's advice, for sure, and he listens to her, but he's not manipulated by her. He deviates course from her recommendations quite a few times here in this book and throughout the series. In addition to that, he's not someone who is begotten to by the R'hllor, the Lord of Light. No, he is an atheist, agnostic at best. He doesn't really care for any of the gods. The only reason he follows suit with Melisandre and her decision to defy the traditional gods of Westeros, the gods of the Seven, is because he sees that her shadowy magic has results. So anyway, with all that out of the way, we're introduced to Stannis Baratheon and Melisandre. Maester Cresson sees that, Stannis is holding court with Melisandre. Maester Cresson has been kicked out of the council, and he goes to this council chamber in hopes of poisoning Melisandre because he sees Melisandre as an evil presence. He sees Melisandre as someone that doesn't belong. So Maester Cresson tries to poison Melisandre, and then Melisandre turns the tables on him because whenever he offers this cup of wine to Melisandre and then he drinks his own cup of wine, rather than the poison being in Melisandre's cup as he had originally intended, Melisandre uses magic to switch the glasses of wine, and Maester Cresson is the one who drinks the poison and kills himself in the process. Melisandre staying alive and just kind of laughing at him, and and Stannis kind of in his own cruel way. Again, Stannis in this first book that he's introduced in, he's kind of seen in this sort of a little bit of a darker light than in the next couple of books. You see him being really cruel to Maester Crescent, just kind of taunting him, calling him an old man and all sorts of things. So Maester Crescent dies. We're introduced to Stannis and Melisandre, and we have our big looming presence that will loom over this entire book. So that happens. All the while, Arya, who in the last book ditched the Red Keep, she escaped King's Landing and she's kind of off on her own, is currently with Yoren from the Night's Watch. Yoren found Arya in the location where Ned Stark was about to be executed, told her not to look, and then cuts her hair off in an effort to try to disguise Arya as a boy, pass her off as a boy, so that no one else can know who she really is. So Arya begins traveling north with this Night's Watchman named Yoren as they travel north along the King's Road en route to the Wall, where all these other people that are with Yoren are going to inevitably be part of the Night's Watch, and Yoren is going to attempt to drop off Arya at Winterfell on the way to the Wall where the Night's Watch is located. So Arya's doing that. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Joffrey is being his usual psychopathic self. He's having this tourney, just laughing at all the people that are participating in this tourney, and at one point, this fellow knight named Dantos shows up very drunk to the tourney, just kind of falling all over himself, making a mockery of himself. Joffrey doesn't want this knight to be doing any more debauchery. He finds him an insult. So Joffrey's about to execute Dantos when Sansa stops Joffrey from executing because she has a heart and she has a conscience and she doesn't want to see someone else die. She's like, no, you can't kill him. And Joffrey is like, oh, why can't I kill him? I'm the king and I can do whatever I want. I'm Joffrey, meh, meh, meh. And Sansa's like, no. And then Sansa, and this is the first instance where you really see that Sansa is a lot more intelligent than she appears. She kind of starts, you see seeds of it here, but she begins to play a little bit of the Game of Thrones here. She puts on this facade where she's like, oh, but King Joffrey, wouldn't it be better if he was your fool? Why, he could give you so many laughs, this Sir Dantos. He is a fool. And Joffrey is like, you know what, Sansa? That's a smart idea. You're actually a smart apple. And of course, Sansa saying this, she thought quick on her feet to try to save Dantos, whilst at the same time giving Joffrey this crazy excuse in order to save Dantos that only Joffrey would buy into. Like, oh yeah, we can't kill him. He has to be our fool. So again, you kind of start seeing Sansa very little bit in this book, but as the series goes on, kind of start to peel the layers of her character as you see this kind of intelligent woman that kind of starts thinking quickly on her feet and thinking on how to put up this facade in order to save the lives and be kind to others without really letting others know on her true intentions. All the while, Tyrion, who has arrived back to King's Landing after being named Hand of the King by his father in the previous book, meets with Cersei. Cersei not too happy with seeing Tyrion here in King's Landing, expecting Tywin to arrive here as the Hand of the King. She's like, what the heck are you doing here? And Tyrion's like, I'm Hand of the King. And Cersei's like, why the heck would I want you? It's like, my dad sent me here, so I gotta be the Hand of the King. So it is here where Cersei just kind of communicates the events that happened in the previous book to Tyrion, including the execution of Ned Stark, which Tywin had communicated to Tyrion. This is incredibly stupid. Why would they do this? Now there's no chance of a Stark-Lannister alliance because now the Starks are at war. So a lot of war council meetings are happening here. Tyrion also gets a chance to meet these three schlubs in particular, who he has met before, but he really gets a chance to kind of play the Game of Thrones here with these three, and it's a whole lot of fun. A lot of this book, similar to the last book, where a lot of the book was dedicated to the shenanigans and King's Council, quite a bit of this book is also dedicated to Tyrion, this time with Tyrion being in King's Landing as he tries to figure out what these three are up to. However, unlike Ned Stark, who was new to King's Landing politics and he didn't really know how scheming and disgusting these three men were in particular, Tyrion, he's kind of used to all that filth. He's used to all the craziness and scheming that these three are prone to. So he's always one step ahead of these three. And just seeing Tyrion kind of play the Game of Thrones and out-scheme the schemers is so much fun. And while he's there, Tyrion also learns about Jon Slint's role in Ned Stark's execution, Jon Slint being a prominent member of the City Watch. Tyrion immediately has Jon Slint dismissed, but not only because he was under Littlefinger's payroll to betray Ned Stark, but more or less because Jon Slint was the person that Cersei sent to a brothel in order to kill one of Robert Baratheon's bastard daughters. right there in the brothel. This bastard daughter being just a baby. Janos Slynt just murdered this baby, and it was horrible. This is a power play made by Cersei, as Cersei attempts to rid the entire continent of Westeros of all of Robert Baratheon's bastard children. This in an effort to make sure that Joffrey Baratheon is uncontested by anyone that has Robert Baratheon's true blood. So that's happening in King's Landing. All the while here at Winterfell, we have Bran and Rickon just kind of hanging out at Winterfell. Maester Luwin is currently taking care of the boys. They're fresh off of the knowledge that Ned Stark has been executed. And during the events of the beginning of the book, we are introduced to two characters, Little Walder and Big Walder. Very minor role characters here, but they come to Winterfell as wards, as Frey wards. Seeing as how Robb Stark has made an alliance with the Freys, there's a new friendship between the Starks and the Freys, and one of the parts of the deal was that Little Walder and Big Walder would be housed here in Winterfell and kind of learn the ways of the Starks. But we quickly learned that Little Walder and Big Walder are not nice people, as we'll learn most of the Freys are not nice people the further we get into the series. Going back to Dragonstone, this time we follow Davos Seaworth, Davos being one of Stannis' most trusted people. He is popularly known as the Onion Knight. 15 years ago, during the events of Robert's Rebellion, when Robert Baratheon was rebelling against Mad King Aerys, Stannis was held up at Storm's End, and a lot of the Targaryen forces were knocking on Storm's End's doorstep, as Stannis was there, essentially just starving himself on Storm's End. They were trying to get to Storm's End, but they couldn't get inside Storm's End. Stannis was held up within the castle, and all the while, the way he was surviving was through Davos, who was a seafarer who would consistently have onions in his packages on the sea voyages. He would bring Stannis onions, and therefore Stannis had some sort of food and nourishment to keep him alive during the siege that was going on. And so thanks to those events, Stannis was able to essentially outlive the Targaryens while he stayed on Storm's End. And in recognition of this, he made Davos his trusted Onion Knight. But because Stannis is who he is, he also has to have Davos pay the punishment for being a thief, because Davos also in his former life was a thief. And so in addition to honoring Davos as his trusted Onion Knight, he also had Davos pay the price of thievery and cut 2 of his fingers off. So again, interesting tidbits about Stannis, but Davos sees Stannis as this honorable man, even despite the fact that Stannis is overly honorable to a comedic effect. So during these events of Davos' first POV chapter, we see Melisandre setting on fire 7 statues of the gods, the 7 gods that are the predominant religion in Westeros. Much to the chagrin of a lot of people on Dragonstone, much to the chagrin of a lot of people in Stannis' army, she burns the 7 statues. And during the ceremony, Stannis pulls out a sword called Lightbringer from these burning statues, and Davos sees, oh, he's got this really cool burning sword. It's so cool. Although this sword, despite the fact that it was in a fire, doesn't seem to be emitting any heat. What's up with this? So as I mentioned before, the events of A Clash of Kings predominantly encapsulate the events of the War of the Five Kings. So we're aware of 4 of the kings, Stannis, Renly, Joffrey, and Robb Stark. However, who's the 5th king? And to that, we look to the events that happen here on Pike. Theon Greyjoy, who was sent out by Robb Stark in an effort to gain the alliance of the Greyjoys, sends out Theon Greyjoy, the ward of the Greyjoys, who has been staying with the Starks for the past 10 years, out to Pike in an effort to make an alliance with his father, Balon Greyjoy, and have Balon Greyjoy join up with the Starks in an effort to allow them to root out the Lannisters from King's Landing. However, when Theon Greyjoy is on Pike, he comes to learn quite quickly that no one on Pike, no one on the Iron Islands really likes Theon Greyjoy. They see Theon Greyjoy as someone who is no longer of the sea, more of the woods. They just see him as an ostracized child, despite the fact that Theon Greyjoy was taken against his will to the Starks. They've kind of, in their minds, thought of Theon Greyjoy as someone who died long ago. But Theon Greyjoy, regardless, returns, tries to treat with Balon Greyjoy. Balon Greyjoy is like, no, I want nothing to do with Robb Stark, because you see, my former son, who I wish was deceased, I am now the king of Westeros. I will rule the Sea Stone Chair, and from the Sea Stone Chair, I will rule all of Westeros. And Theon Greyjoy is like, oh, father, didn't you learn from the first time that you were a complete idiot for trying to rise up against the entire continent of Westeros? And Balon Greyjoy is like, who are you to tell me who I am, stupid son of mine? So it is here where Theon Greyjoy also comes to meet his family members here. Asha Greyjoy, his sister, who, similar to Arya, has this kind of anti-feminine streak going on for her, someone who's against the grain. She wields an axe, someone who just kind of laughs in the face of danger, very brutish, like drinks alcohol, like, yes, I'm one of the men, despite the fact that I'm a woman. Haha, look at me. And then his uncle, Aeron Greyjoy, who used to be a party animal, but has since found religion, this one being the religion of the drowned gods, the drowned gods being the predominant religion of the Iron Islands. So he's a reformed man who doesn't really party. And then probably my favorite Greyjoy, a fan favorite, Victarion Greyjoy. Victarion Greyjoy, this man, he's just completely psychotic, but psychotic in such a hilarious way where it's like, oh man, he's just completely out there, but it's so funny and he's so interesting. He's a complete moron, but you just can't help but fall in love with the moronic guy. So anyway, they all don't like Theon. They make fun of Theon, and so Theon, in an effort to try to gain the love of his family, the family that abandoned him 10 years ago, that doesn't want anything to do with him, he's like, all right, Father Balon, I'm going to go along with your plan. Yes, you're the king of the Seastone Chair. Yes, you're the king of Westeros. What can I do for you? And so Balon sends Theon out to the stony shore in some sort of small task alongside with Aeron Damphair, be like, oh, just take over the stony shore. It's like, what? You don't trust me with a big task? Asha's gonna get to take over Deepwood Mont. What? It's like, I don't trust you yet, son. Maybe in due time, you'll give me reason to see you as my own. But until then, you're dead to me. So Theon and Aeron Damphair go to the stony shore, which I believe is over here somewhere. All the while, Asha Greyjoy heads over to Deepwood Mont, and Victarion Greyjoy just heads somewhere. I believe he goes to Mount Caelan to try to take that over. So we've got rebelling Greyjoys in the north, so Robb Stark's got another thing to worry about besides the Lannister forces. And speaking of Robb starts off in the Riverlands and then heads out towards the Westerlands in order to take over a couple of towns here in an effort to try to weaken Tywin's grasp on the Westerlands and weaken Tywin's grasp over the entire continent of Westeros, removing a piece of that Casterly Rock pie from underneath Tywin's nose. But before he does that, he sends out his mother, Catelyn Stark, as his envoy over to Bitterbridge in an effort to talk to Renly Baratheon to see if there could be a potential Tyrell Stark alliance here that could help Robb Stark defeat the Lannisters in battle. Meanwhile, and we'll get to my least favorite part of A Clash of Kings, similar to how it's my least favorite part in virtually every A Song of Ice and Fire book, Daenerys Targaryen, oh boy, my favorite character. She is currently aimlessly following a red comet that's in the sky. One of the things that I neglected to mention is throughout the events of The Clash of Kings, there is a red comet in the sky, and every character within this book interprets the comet as a different thing. Melisandre interprets the comet as the coming of Stannis Baratheon as the one true king. Cersei Lannister interprets the comet as a calling for Joffrey Baratheon's name day. It's like, oh, this is to signal the start of a new wonderful time under Joffrey Baratheon's rule. And then Daenerys Targaryen sees it as her opportunity to follow the red comet and see what her destiny is. So throughout the events of A Clash of Kings, she kind of meanders around the Red Waste. She's with her Dothraki Khalasar, who's currently following her after they saw that Daenerys Targaryen did not get burned in the pyre that she had set for Midi Mazdur, in addition to Dany now having 3 newly hatched baby dragons. Just kind of crawling around the Red Waste. She meets up with a guy named Shada Shoan Daxos here in Karth. Nothing of substance really happens. You could skip most of these chapters or just read the Wikipedia on them. I know I'm going to come across as quite a snob here, but the chapters are just so boring. I do not care at all what Dany is doing. So anyway, she does a whole bunch of nothing as in Karth. All the while, Arya, who is currently traveling north with Yoren and the band of would-be Night's Watchmen, she's currently masquerading herself as a boy, and somewhere along the way, they get taken captive because a couple of people under the Lannister forces, predominantly Amory Lorch, they find these would-be Night's Watchmen. They're like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, we're going to the Night's Watch. And they're like, we don't care. So they find where Arya and Yoren and Hot Pie and Gendry are staying, and they burn their holdfast. So Arya runs away from the burning holdfast, which is where Yoren meets his demise. But before Yoren dies, he tells Arya to get out of here, to head to Winterfell. But before she can head out on her own, she can strike out on her own, she sees a prisoner that is currently that has been traveling with them all along. There have been 3 prisoners that have kind of had their own cage set up separate apart from the other people traveling with Yoren. They are considered the most dangerous criminals that Yoren has taken to be part of the Night's Watch. And one of the criminals is like, help, save me, save me. And so Arya grabs an axe, throws it to this prisoner. The prisoner grabs the axe, breaks out, and he and his 2 prisoner mates escape the cage right before the inferno engulfs them. And the prisoner is like, thank you, my child. You will see me again soon. So Arya, Hot Pie, and Gendry, and Lami, who's another character, escape right before they are taken by Amory Lorch. However, they are soon captured by another one of Tywin's men called Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. However, unlike Amory Lorch, that may have just taken these people as prisoners, Gregor Clegane and his kind of right-hand man known as the Tickler proved themselves to be some pretty horrible individuals, because rather than just taking them as prisoners, they also kill Lami, one of the people traveling alongside Arya and Hot Pie and Gendry, right then and there, and torture some of the other villagers that they have captured throughout their burning rampage of the Riverlands. Again, Gregor Clegane is someone Tywin had sent to burn the Riverlands in retribution for having Tyrion kidnapped under his nose by Catelyn Stark. But again, the real reason was just Tywin just wanted to start a war, and Tyrion being kidnapped was the perfect excuse for Tywin to try to take more of that Westerosi pie that he really wanted. Back in King's Landing, Tyrion, who is continuing to act as Hand of the King, is trying to see to the city's defenses, seeing as how Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon are potentially at his doorstep. So Tyrion plots with a couple of people here, mainly with the help of Varys, in order to have a couple of blacksmiths build a chain for mysterious purposes, and a couple of pyromancers create this substance known as wildfire. It's as hot as a dragon's fire, and it's what Mad King Aerys used during his reign to torture some of the people that he wasn't too fond of. So Tyrion finds some chain, some wildfire to be used for an unknown purpose, and all the while he's trying to do all this whilst living a double life, where he's staying with Shay, the whore that Bronn brought to him in the previous book of Game of Thrones, and trying to keep his relationship with this whore a secret from Cersei and a secret from everybody else on King's Landing. Now, one of the interesting things that Tyrion does throughout his time here in King's Landing is he is beginning to realize that one of these 3 jokesters, is consistently revealing his plans to his sister Cersei, and Cersei is consistently, interrupting Tyrion, like, Tyrion, what do you mean you're sending Tommen to Dorne? Or Tyrion, what do you mean you're sending Myrcella to Dorne? So Tyrion, wanting to get to the bottom of things, he gives 3 alternate plans to each of these individuals, Pycelle, Littlefinger, and Varys, to see which one of them is reporting on him. And come to find out, one of the stories that he told Grand Maester Pycelle that he promised Myrcella to go to Dorne, to be warded by Dorne in an effort to try to build a Dornish/Lannister alliance. And then he told Littlefinger that, Myrcella and Robert Arryn are going to get married. And then he told Varys that, I'm promising Tommen is going to be in Dorne. So again, he told these three different things, and when Cersei finds out, Cersei's like, what do you mean Myrcella's going to Dorne? And Tyrion's like, oh, okay, Pycelle is the one who's spying on me. He's reporting to Cersei. So then he has this idiot Grand Maester Pycelle dragged from underneath the bedsheets when he's trying to sleep with a prostitute, and has him thrown into the black cells where he belongs. Now, Tyrion's not the only one who's doing stuff in King's Landing, as Sansa, throughout her time in King's Landing, has gotten a new friend. The person she helped save, that being Dantos, during Joffrey's tourney. He comes to find Sansa in the Godswood, and Sansa's like, oh. So Dantos had left a letter behind for Sansa saying, meet me in the Godswood, I'll help you escape King's Landing. And she was expecting this knight in shining armor. And it turns out to be just Dantos, this drunken person who was now made a fool, thanks to Sansa saving his life. And so, as a way to thank her for saving his life, he's like, I'll get you out of this city. I just need a little bit more time. And Sansa's like, hey, please take me out of the city. Because throughout the events of the book, Joffrey has been torturing this poor girl. She has had Sir Meryn beat her. He has stripped her in front of the other King's Guardsmen before Tyrion stepped in to save her. He's been just a cruel, cruel boy. And all this stems from the fact that because Robb Stark is having so many victories in the Westerlands, Joffrey has grown increasingly more and more pissed off. And his way to vent out his frustrations is by taking them out on Sansa. So Sansa, wanting nothing to do with Joffrey and wanting nothing more to do with King's Landing, she will take any escape she can, even if it means trusting this drunken fool Dantos. Meanwhile, in the north, Bran Stark, again, who predominantly just functions as a window point of view perspective for the events that happen. He doesn't really have much of a personality beyond that, in my subjective opinion. He hears rumblings from the other Northmen about this bastard son of Roose Bolton called Ramsay Snow, who previously forced himself within a marriage to Donella Hornwood and then locked her up in a tower in an effort to starve her and have her essentially relinquish her lands to Ramsay Snow. And in this gruesome scene where she essentially bit her own fingers off in an effort to try to provide nutrition for herself before she starved to death, which she did. So everybody in the north in Winterfell is like, oh, this Ramsay Snow, such a horrible, horrible person. How could Roose Bolton, have unleashed this person amongst us? And Roose Bolton previously was like, I want nothing to do with my bastard son. He's doing his own things. So Bran is kind of learning about this Ramsay character. All the while, there's kind of a harvest feast going on here in Winterfell. And these individuals we have not been introduced to, Mira and Jojen Reed, come to Winterfell on behalf of the Craningmans from House Reed. No idea if I said that right. Please correct me down in the comments section down below. And so thanks to these two new individuals that come to visit Winterfell, they come to learn about Bran's dreams. And they're like, Bran, these aren't just weird dreams. You're a green seer. You're seeing things through the perspective of your direwolf, Summer. And Bran is like, what are you talking about? Like, no, I know what I'm talking about because I, Jojen Reed, am also a green seer. So as Bran and Jojen Reed are trading green seeing stories back and forth, Sir Roderick Cassell, who was out just kind of doing stuff in the north, he returns back to Winterfell with stories about how Ramsay Snow was actually killed. And it's like, oh, Ramsay Snow has been killed, and we found the person who's been helping him all along, this horrible individual named Reek. And the reason he's called Reek is because he was covered, his name was already Reek, but he was also covered in feces when they found him next to the dead body of Ramsay Snow, who was shot down with a bunch of arrows by these Northmen. So Sir Roderick Cassell brings Reek to the prisons of Winterfell, where he'll stay for a good while. All the while, Jon Snow, Samwell Tarly, and Jorah Mormont are currently venturing north of the Wall, again trying to get to the bottom of what's causing all the others to appear within the north of the Wall, going around all these abandoned wildling villages. Ghost, Jon Snow's direwolf, comes across some buried dragonglass weapons. There might be something to this, so he hands them over to Samwell Tarly. And then they stay at Craster's Keep, where Craster is this wildling who is friendly in the loosest sense of the word to people of the Night's Watch. This Craster doesn't really want anything to do with Mance Rayder, the man who's currently calling himself King of the Wildlings. Craster wants something to do with him, so he'll be like, hey, Night's Watchman, rid me of this Mance Rayder. I want nothing to do with him. So Jon Snow, Jeor, and Samwell Tarly are just kind of traveling around here north of the Wall. Again, not really much of substance happens. A lot of these chapters could honestly be combined and nothing of the story would be lost. All the while, here back south, Arya and her traveling companion of prisoners, including Hot Pie Gendry and a couple of other tortured villagers, under the behest of Gregor Clegane and the Tickler, arrive at Harrenhal, where Tywin is currently staying. Tywin is currently issuing orders for the Lannister forces from his seat here in Harrenhal. Although Arya never interacts with Tywin Lannister, she does see him kind of through a door that's slightly ajar here and there. She doesn't interact with him like the show. I do think that's one of the more slightly positive changes from the show. There's someone else Arya interacts with later on here in this book that they changed to Tywin Lannister, but for the purposes of this book, Tywin Lannister barely interacts with Arya, and he's just issuing plans from Harrenhal. Arya, she's kind of, her and the other villagers who are prisoners of the Lannister forces, they kind of just function as understewards and workers for this Harrenhal tower in order to try to keep this decaying tower up to snuff. And Arya, during her time here in Harrenhal, actually comes in contact with the prisoner she saved back in the Burning Holdfast when Amory Lorch set fire to the Holdfast. And that prisoner is Jaqen H'ghar. Jaqen H'ghar, this Braavosi man who has a very poetic and mysterious way, a girl knows, the girl has multiple names, a way of speaking. And so, as a reward for Arya saving his life and the life of his two prisoner buddies, for saving the lives of 3 people, the gods need to have 3 other gods as payment. So all this to say, as reward for Arya saving the life of Jaqen H'ghar will kill 3 people to thank her. And so Arya immediately goes to say like, okay, well, can you kill one of Tywin Lannister's horrible men? His name is Chiswick. He and his fellow Lannister companions, they sexually assaulted in a group fashion this innocent innkeeper's daughter, and it's horrible, and I want him dead. And Jaqen H'ghar says, it will be done. And sure enough, 3 days later, this Jaqen H'ghar Although we don't see it, this Chiswick falls from the top of a tower wall, and everyone's like, did this happen? It's the curse of Black Heron. Black Heron's curse is on us. Harrenhal is haunted. And Jack and Hagar just kind of winks at Arya, and Arya's like, he's my new best friend. Meanwhile, Catelyn, who's off in Bitterbridge here, she gets to meet Renly Baratheon, Stannis Baratheon's younger brother, and Robert Baratheon's youngest brother. And here he meets a couple of other people, predominantly Brienne of Tarth, Marjorie of Tyrell, who she sees from afar. Marjorie Tyrell is currently betrothed to Renly Baratheon. Renly Baratheon quickly wed Marjorie Tyrell in order to declare himself king and declare Marjorie Tyrell queen. And then Marjorie Tyrell's brother, Loras Tyrell, who is this very famous knight, very good swordsman. So Renly Baratheon, in commemoration of being the new king of Westeros, is currently having this tourney, and everyone anticipating that Loras Tyrell was going to win this tourney. No, it turns out that this unexpected victor was none other than Brienne of Tarth. Brienne of Tarth, coming from the land of Tarth, a land that is known for sapphires, allegedly, and Catelyn comes to befriend this Brienne. So Renly makes Brienne one of his Rainbow Knights, and Brienne is very pleased because Brienne has a kind of middle school style crush on Renly Baratheon. It's kind of cute. Throughout this entire process, Catelyn kind of gets to know Renly Baratheon. He sees that Renly Baratheon has a rather immature view of this war. He sees it as like, oh, you know, I'll make a name for myself and I will kill these people and I'll be great and grand. Whereas Catelyn, who is a more mature, realistic woman, sees it as like, war is horrible, dude. Like, what the heck are you doing? She also sends Robb's terms to Renly Baratheon. Renly is cordial with Catelyn. He's like, all right, I'll hear the terms of your son, the King of the North, the Robb Stark. Like, come join us. Like, let's make an alliance and let's take down the Lannisters. Like, all right, I'll help you on this, but only if you consider me as king. Like, yes, Robb Stark can be the King of the North, but he has to bend the knee to me, the true King of Westeros. And Catelyn is just like, just kind of not saying a thing. So throughout the events here, at some point, Renly Baratheon alongside Brienne and Catelyn, they venture forth towards to Storm's End, where they are currently meeting up with Stannis and Melisandre and Davos in a parley. Stannis and Renly are seeing each other for the first time in quite a while, and Stannis is like, you should bend the knee to me. And Renly is like, no, brother, you should bend the knee to me. You have no fashion sense. And Stannis is like, oh, you look like a peach. And so Renly is like, here, have a peach. Like, I will offer you, if you come bend the knee to me, I will offer you Storm's End and offer you this peach. Who would deny this peach? And Stannis is like, I don't need your fruit. I also don't need your Storm's End. Like, this is my Storm's End. I can take it whenever I want. You should bend the knee to me. So they're just kind of, you know, little school children being here like, no, I'm king. No, I'm king. And Catelyn, trying to be the mature middle person here, is like, boys, like, what are you doing? Like, the real enemy is Joffrey, Cersei, the Lannisters. Let's make peace, and we're so much stronger when we're united. Let's try to come together and kill Cersei and kill Joffrey and take back the Iron Throne for the goodness. And it's like, no, only I get to rule the Iron Throne. And Stannis is like, no, only I will rule the Iron Throne. So Stannis tells Renly, like, you have until tomorrow to bend the knee to me. And Renly is like, look at all the people that I have here. And although I don't have portraits for them, but there's like 50,000 men currently with Renly Baratheon, completely outnumbering Stannis' forces. Like, who do you think would win in a battle, me or you? And Stannis is like, I would win. I will see you tomorrow, Renly Baratheon. It's like, or I'll see you tomorrow, Stannis Baratheon, my dear brother. So nothing was solved here as Renly and Stannis are at an impasse. So Renly intends for the Tyrell forces to meet Stannis' forces in battle on the next day. And as Renly prepares himself for battle, a shadow in the shape of Stannis Baratheon comes in the middle of the night and stabs Renly Baratheon in the back and through the chest and kills Renly Baratheon. Thus, one of the 5 kings on this War of the 5 Kings dies. And Catelyn is freaking out, and Brienne is freaking out, and nobody really knows what happened. Catelyn sees this shadow. Some of the Tyrell forces immediately come inside. They're like, what happened? What? Renly is dead. What happened? And Catelyn is like, a shadow. Brienne is also saying the same thing. A shadow came. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Are you smoking crack? And so Catelyn, the first thing that comes to her mind is like, it was Stannis. Stannis did it. And so Catelyn and Brienne flee before anyone tries to pin Renly's death on them. All the while, a lot of the Tyrell forces quickly switch allegiance over to Stannis now that Renly is dead. Some of the other Tyrell forces retreat back to Highgarden and to Bitterbridge. So Catelyn and Brienne make their way back to Riverrun. All the while, Tyrion comes to learn about Renly's death here at Storm's End. So he talks to Cersei about, like, Cersei, Like, Renly is dead. That's one less king to worry about. Let's send someone over to the Tyrells. Only some of the Tyrells followed Stannis. A lot of the other Tyrells don't like Stannis. We can make a Lannister-Tyrell agreement. And Cersei just begrudgingly agrees. So they come up with a plan to marry off Joffrey over to Marjorie Tyrell, and the person who will deliver the news is none other than Littlefinger. So Littlefinger makes his way over to Bitterbridge in order to be an envoy for this cause of having Joffrey marry off to Marjorie to create this Lannister-Tyrell alliance, and then he also heads off to Highgarden to meet with the Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell being the grandmother of Marjorie Tyrell and the mother of Mace Tyrell, who is Marjorie Tyrell's father, in an effort, again, to spur this Tyrell-Lannister alliance. Meanwhile, Tywin, he hears of all the losses in the Westerlands, so he heads off from Harrenhal to try to meet Robb Stark in battle and also kind of take care of the Westerlands here, thus leaving Arya alone here at Harrenhal, and where she comes up with a second name, this one being Whis, someone who had been kind of slave-riding Arya and some of the other prisoners and villagers. Meanwhile, Theon wins an easy victory alongside Aeron Damphair at the Stony Shore, and Catelyn asks Brienne to be her sworn sword as they head up to Riverrun, and Brienne promises her services to Catelyn. So then off in King's Landing, and again, I'm sorry this is all over the place. Again, A Clash of Kings is a little bit more all over the place when compared to a Game of Thrones. Back in King's Landing, Tyrion sends Myrcella off to Dorne to be warded off by Doran Martell here in Dorne. And while all this is going on, some of the townsfolk who have grown restless over the fact that there is no food currently in King's Landing, currently the Tyrells, because this is war, have a blockade over here along the bay. Because they have a blockade, no food is able to get to King's Landing. Therefore, a lot of the King's Landing citizens are starving, and a lot of them point the finger at both Tyrion and Joffrey. So there's a huge riot that happens. People throw dung at Joffrey. Joffrey gets mad. He has the Hound, Sandor Clegane, pull out his sword, kill one of the townsfolk, and the other townsfolk get super pissed off, so they try to overwhelm the King's Guards. They overwhelm quite a few of the Lannister men. Quite a few people die. A lot of chaos going on in King's Landing, just all sorts of ruckus. Tyrion slaps Joffrey in one of the most satisfying scenes from the book. Yes, thank you so much, Tyrion. All the while, Stannis, Melisandre, and Davos plot here in Storm's End on how to march off to King's Landing. Obviously, they haven't really taken over Storm's End. They're just kind of staying there. So Stannis sends Melisandre and Davos under the Cloak of Night to have Davos sail Melisandre underneath the castle of Storm's End at night and have Melisandre, in one of the book's creepiest scenes, birth this shadow baby from her female body parts, and this shadow baby just kind of fly into Storm's End and kill Courtney Penrose, as Davos just looks on in horror and see that this shadow is very much shaped like Stannis, and Stannis is the one responsible for these shadows that are coming from Melisandre. Well, Courtney Penrose dies, and Stannis takes Robert Baratheon's most well-known bastard son, Edric Storm. Meanwhile, Theon Greyjoy, wanting the respect of his Iron Men, he's tired of not getting the respect of his father, tired of not getting the respect of his uncles and his sister, so he devises a plan to leave Aeron Damphair here with Dagmar Cleftjaw at the Stony Shore, and devises a plan to take over Winterfell, which he successfully does because he knows Winterfell's defenses in and out, having lived there for 10 years, infiltrates Winterfell, and commands Bran to relinquish the castle to Theon Greyjoy. Theon, what the heck are you doing? Bran, knowing that there's no other option, relinquishes Winterfell over to Theon, and thus Theon crowns himself the King of Winterfell. Meanwhile, in the north, Jon Snow meets up with a Night's Watch, a famous Night's Watchman named Qhorin Halfhand. As he and Qhorin venture here further north of the Wall, they come in contact with a couple of wildlings, kill a couple of wildlings. However, one of the wildlings, named Ygritte, a woman with red hair, a beautiful young woman who always says, "You know nothing, Jon Snow," interacts with Jon. Jon, feeling the blood rush, and I'm not talking about to his head, decides to let Ygritte go, feeling a little bit of compassion, and Qhorin Halfhand doesn't hold it against him. He's like, you horny teenager, you, and gives him nuggies back at base. All the while, down in Harrenhal, Arya realizing that, you know what, these people that I've been killing, they're really just undermen. They don't really have control of what's going on here in the war. They're just lackeys here. Like, the third person on the list of people that Jaqen can kill needs to be someone who has some sort of influence over the happenings of King's Landing and of Westeros. So Jaqen says, like, you could order me to kill Joffrey. I can't promise it'll happen tomorrow, but it could happen next week, could happen next year. He will die if you ask for it. However, seeing a couple of prisoners from the north being captured and sent to the prison cells in Harrenhal, she tries to bargain with Jaqen, like, Jaqen, can you save more than the third person? It's like Jaqen says, like, only 3 is all I was promised. So Arya, in a clever little scheme, says, okay, the third person is Jaqen Hagar. And Jaqen's like, what? It's like, yep, you're the third person I want to die. Jaqen is like, change your name. It's like, nope, I made my promise, third person. It's like, ah. So Jaqen begrudgingly helps Arya save the northern prisoners that are currently staying at Harrenhal from their prison cells. She brings this weasel soup, over to a couple of guardsmen who are currently protecting the prison where the Northmen are staying. They're like, oh, finally some soup for our recognition. We're finally going to eat. And then Arya and Jaqen pour the soup over the guards, and they're like, ah! They start burning, freaking out. Arya frees the Northmen, and then there's a huge battle that goes on. A lot of the guards die, and Harrenhal has fallen over to a northern claim. Roose Bolton arrives to Harrenhal, Roose Bolton being one of Robb Stark's bannermen. He's like, who is responsible for this? And everyone points to Arya, who's currently going by the name Nan, because she doesn't want to be recognized as Arya. And Roose Bolton is like, you'll be my cupbearer, young Nan. And Nan is like, yippee! Over here at Riverrun, Catelyn finally has a chance to have a conversation with Jaime Lannister over everything that transpired in the previous book. Jaime, pretty much having nothing to hide and having nothing to lose, is straight up tells Catelyn the truth about everything, tells her how he was the one to push Bran out of a window because he intended to kill him, because he saw Jaime sleeping with Cersei, thus potentially damaging Joffrey's claim to the Iron Throne. He also witnessed the death of Ned Stark's father and Ned Stark's brother, Brandon and Rickon Stark, all those years ago during the Mad King Aerys' reign. Jaime is just telling her all these things, and Catelyn, wanting nothing more to do with this man, commands Brienne to take Jaime out of Riverrun and make way towards King's Landing. Not a very smart plan, but I guess in Catelyn's head she's thinking like, well, maybe if I give Jaime back to King's Landing, they'll finally give my daughters back to me, not knowing that one of those daughters is currently in Harrenhal. Meanwhile, in the north, at Winterfell, Theon's still not getting the recognition that he wants from the Iron Man, and not getting the recognition that he wants from the Northmen, as everyone kind of looks at Theon as a complete idiot. He starts killing a couple of Northmen in hopes that they will finally respect him. However, Bran and Rickon have managed to escape from Winterfell. So Theon is like, no, like everyone's going to think I'm a complete fool. Even though he is a complete fool, he's like, no, Bran and Rickon, where are they? I have to find them. And so he frees this prisoner who promises to help him, this prisoner named Reek. And Reek is like, oh, I can help you. And Theon is like, oh, I have nowhere to turn. Fellow prisoner Reek, can you help me? What am I going to do about this Bran and Rickon situation? So Reek convinces Theon. This is a plot twist that's revealed later on in the book, but essentially what happens is Reek kills a couple of northern Miller's boys, just innocent Miller's boys that had nothing to do with anything, kills them, dunks their head in oil, and passes them off as Bran and Rickon's heads, and then shows them off to the people of Winterfell. Theon's like, look, this is what happens when you defy me. These are Bran and Rickon's heads, even though they're really not. I killed Bran and Rickon, so now you have to respect me. Without really realizing that because he killed Bran and Rickon, the people at Winterfell now even want less to do with him than they wanted to do with him prior. Asha, hearing of everything that's going on in Winterfell, marches on from Deepwood Mont over to Winterfell and talks to Theon like, Theon, what are you doing, you complete idiot? Winterfell is far inland. There's no body of water nearby. It's like you're surrounded by northern forces, and now you've killed Bran and Rickon? Are you some kind of idiot? And Theon is like, oh, how dare you talk back to me, stupid sister, you never respected me. And Asha's like, come with me, come back to Deepwood Mont, let's talk about this, let's be civil. And Theon's like, no, you stupid sister, I will stay here at Winterfell, I will forever be at Winterfell, you never got respect, now you will have my respect. And Asha's like, all right, well, you'll die here at Winterfell, bye, brother. And so she leaves Theon behind with Reek, and Theon's freaking out because Asha was right. They are currently being surrounded by a whole bunch of northern forces, and there's nowhere to go. Theon has nowhere to escape. So Maester Luwin, who's currently being held prisoner at Winterfell, he was the Maester of the Starks. He's like, Theon, you have to relinquish the castle. You're surrounded by northern forces. There's nowhere to go. What are you going to do? So Theon is freaking out. He's like, no, what am I going to do? So he sends out Reek, and Reek is like, hey, Theon Greyjoy, my lord, I was under Ramsay's employ. I can go to the Dreadfort and bring back 20,000 northern men, some of my former master Ramsay Snow's men, to help us with this cause. And Theon is like, oh, you will? Thank you, Sir Reek. I trust you completely. Reek is like, yeah, sure. Whatever you say, my lord. So Reek goes off, and Theon is currently being held behind the walls of Winterfell, is being surrounded by northern men, and he's all sorts of freaking out. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it is here where we get to my favorite part in this book, probably my favorite part in the entire series. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. So up to this point, if you couldn't already tell, I enjoy A Clash of Kings, but this book is a little bit all over the place. Although I didn't talk a lot about what happens with Dany and Jon, and even Catelyn have quite a bit of bloat in their stories. I kind of just summarize it pretty quickly here, or relatively quickly, in order to kind of get to the most important parts, but there's quite a bit of bloat here. So, up to this point in the story, I'm like, yeah, A Clash of Kings is a good book, but it didn't quite grab me as much as A Game of Thrones. However, that completely changes with this book's climax, because now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the famous Battle of Blackwater Bay. Oh my gosh, I love this moment. This giant moment that encapsulates, I think, like 70 to 75 pages of this book. It is a sequence that jumps from chapter to chapter between 3 different POV perspectives as we jump between Sansa, Tyrion, and Davos as they narrate different parts of this Battle of the Blackwater Bay, and we see this battle up front. And it's suspenseful, there's tension, it is glorious, it is George R.R. Martin at his finest when it comes to writing action scenes anyway. So, previous to the Battle of Blackwater Bay, Tyrion had Tommen sent out of town in order to help protect him. He's somewhere in Rosby. And, one thing I forgot to mention, Eris Oakheart, he also went with Myrcella off to Dorne. So Myrcella and Eris Oakheart, her Kingsguard protector, are off in Dorne, and Tommen is somewhere in Rosby, thus leaving the Lannisters here at King's Landing by themselves. So Stannis Baratheon, now having no one in his way, commands a force that travels by night through different campgrounds until they reach King's Landing from the west. All the while, Melisandre is staying back at Dragonstone, and Davos is traveling by ship with Alistair Florent here from the east via Blackwater Bay. So the King's Landing forces are trapped on both sides by a seafaring army and by a horse army. What's going to happen here? So Tyrion, having devised the plan throughout the entire book, just for this very moment, has just kind of a couple of lowly barges here in the Blackwater Bay filled with this liquid, this substance that we had been informed of earlier in the book, this wildfire substance. And Davos sees this wildfire substance and immediately knows what's happening. He screams as one of the ships accidentally collides with one of the barges full of this wildfire liquid, and immediately the entire Blackwater Bay explodes in this engulfment of green fire. A lot of ships are set on fire, including Davos' ship, which Davos is then thrown overboard, and as he's swimming, he looks above the surface of the water, and he sees that a chain currently being raised up by Bronn and a couple of Oxmen here at the entrance of the Blackwater Bay, are currently ensnaring all the ships that are within the Blackwater Bay inside the Blackwater Bay. So now they are trapped with all the wildfire. So there's nowhere for these ships to go except further west towards King's Landing. The ships that survived the wildfire explosion anyway. But Tyrion knows this isn't enough. Tyrion knows it's like, all right, well, obviously we have wildfire, but there's still a lot of forces here. And we've also got forces just kind of ramming here at the King's Gate. They want to enter. So Tyrion is like, I'm going to go onto the field and do something about it. Tyrion goes off here into the King's Gate to try to meet Stannis' forces head on. All the while, Sansa, who is trapped with Cersei at the Red Keep, has to suffer quite a few torturous conversations with Cersei. Cersei comes to learn that Sansa is currently flowering. She finally had her first period, and Cersei is like, oh, Joffrey will put a baby in you soon enough, and Sansa's freaking out. She's like, oh. Even though by this point, Cersei has kind of agreed to promise Joffrey off to Marjorie, but Cersei just wants to torture Sansa. So Tyrion goes to meet a lot of Stannis' forces, alongside with Sandor Clegane, goes to meet them head on. However, when Sandor Clegane sees a lot of the wildfire that's happening here in Blackwater Bay, Sandor Clegane decides to ditch, and Tyrion's like, what the heck are you doing? He's like, bugger you. It's like, what about Joffrey? Bugger the king. Bugger you. It's like, no. So Sandor Clegane officially ditches camp, so Tyrion, alongside with his squire, Podrick Payne, are on their own here at the King's Gate. They're trying to stop Stannis' forces. At some point, A lot of the ships here that were engulfed in the explosion of the wildfire kind of start linking together in this sort of bridge, this bridge of ships that connect King's Landing to some of the land here on the south of King's Landing, thus allowing a lot of Stannis' forces to run along the ships and ram their battering ram into one of the gates. Tyrion is like, no, you don't. So he rides a horse up along the bridge of ships, and as he boards a ship and engages some of these people in battle, Tyrion's quite an athlete here in this Battle of Blackwater Bay sequence. Sir Mandon Moore, one of the Kingsguard men who was sent to protect Tyrion, decides now is the perfect time to betray Tyrion Lannister. So as Tyrion kind of gets overtaken by this battle and he starts kind of losing this battle and a couple of Stannis' forces kind of start taking him, Tyrion kind of falls through some of the ships and he's getting tired, badly damaged, he's on his last legs. Sir Mandon Moore pulls out his sword and swipes 3/4 of his nose, thus leaving Tyrion noseless for pretty much the rest of the series. Tyrion, unconscious, not really knowing what's going on, being struck down by Sir Mandon Moore, looks off into the distance, and he sees something strange off in the distance. He sees Renly Baratheon. Renly Baratheon here, or at least someone who appears to look like Renly Baratheon, kind of fighting off Stannis' army here in the west, alongside what looks to be a couple of other forces here. Something's going on. Tyrion is a little bit confused. He doesn't know what's going on. However, before Tyrion can kind of fully get a grasp of the situation and pull himself up, Sir Mandon Moore stands over him, about to deliver the killing blow. And as Sir Mandon Moore is about to strike down one of the fan favorite characters of the series, Podrick Payne. Oh my gosh, little lowly squire Podrick Payne pushes Mandon Moore out of the ship, pushes him overboard, and saves Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion can't believe it. He's a little bit confused. He's loopy. He thinks Jaime Lannister may have saved him, but no, it was Podrick Payne. And so Tyrion kind of goes unconscious. All the while, Sansa retreats to her quarters, to her room, just all sorts of sad, all sorts of angry, all sorts of depressed, just really wanting this battle to end, wanting Joffrey to die, wanting Cersei to die. She doesn't want to be here at King's Landing anymore. She just wants to be away. And so who does she see in the shadows of her bedchamber but this man, Sandor Clegane, who has officially ditched the Lannisters? And Sandor, he's like, I can take you with me. I can take you away from here for King's Landing. However, Sansa has kind of a change of heart, and she's like, maybe it's not so good of an idea. So Sandor pulls out a knife, kind of threateningly, kind of like a madman, drunk, and he like puts his knife in Sansa's mouth and is like, Sansa, you will, like a little bird, you will sing me one last song before I depart from here, or I will cut you open. And so Sansa, kind of fearful, she sings this sad song, this hymn, this mother's hymn to Sandor, and she grabs Sandor's cheeks and sees that it feels Sandor's tears. Sandor having, seen the wildfire and experienced all this bloody war business that has gone on. And obviously, as she's cupping his cheeks and sings them comfortably, she opens her eyes and Sandor's gone. He's gone missing. So Sansa takes Sandor's white cape and goes to sleep. And when she wakes up, she sees Sir Dantos singing and dancing and celebrating in victory. And she's like, oh, my glorious Jonquil, like Florian and Jonquil, my glorious Sansa. The battle is over. The battle is won. The Lannisters have won. And she's like, oh, great. That's not good news. And she's like, oh, the day is saved. Tywin Lannister, Randall Tarly, and Mace Tyrell, and Renly Baratheon. And she's like, Renly Baratheon? What the heck is going on? Renly Baratheon have saved us. The city is saved. The Tyrells are heroes. Tywin is a hero. And so Sansa's like, oh, great. So the Battle of Blackwater Bay ends. Stannis and Davos retreat back to Dragonstone, pretty much having lost most of their forces. This is technically not true. Only Stannis returns to Dragonstone. Davos is actually still lost at sea, essentially licking their wounds off in Dragonstone. Tywin has arrived into King's Landing. Tywin has been given a bunch of honors. Tywin is now the hand of the king, as he was originally supposed to be until he had named Tyrion. But now he's back to reclaim the position as hand of the king. Meanwhile, Tyrion is off in his bedchambers, just lamenting the fact that he's bedridden and everyone else is being named all these honors. Margaery Tyrell has officially been betrothed to Joffrey Baratheon. Loras Tyrell, Margaery Tyrell's brother, has been given a spot on the Kingsguard. All sorts of happiness and celebrations going on in King's Landing. Except obviously, Sansa and Tyrion are not happy about any of this. So that ends that spectacular moment of A Clash of Kings. However, the battles are not over, as Reek has returned with his promised 20,000 men, and Theon couldn't be happier, and he's like, Reek, you came back to save me! And so the northern forces that had surrounded Winterfell all get taken down by Reek's forces of 20,000 men from the Dreadfort. And Theon is like, wow, I don't believe it. How did you do it? How did you manage to convince the men of the Dreadfort to follow you, fellow Reek? And Reek is like, I'm not Reek. I'm Ramsay Bolton. And Theon is like, oh, okay. Well, thank you, Ramsay. How can I thank you? And that moment, Reek knocks out Theon Greyjoy. And he's like, oh, how dare you ever call me anything but your lord. And so Reek, or Ramsay Bolton, commands that Little Walder and Big Walder be removed from Winterfell. Why all so friendly with the phrase all of a sudden, fellow Bolton, Ramsay Bolton? And then Ramsay commands his force of Dreadfort men to burn Winterfell. So Ramsay takes Theon Greyjoy back to the Dreadfort, where there he'll stay for the foreseeable future. He's not dead. When I first read this book, I thought Theon was dead, but he's not dead. And speaking of Bolton, all the while Arya here in Harrenhal, after saving the lives of all the northern men, Jaqen H'ghar goes off to Braavos, but not before leaving a coin behind for Arya. Says, should you ever need me, should you ever need help with anything or need to reach Braavos or reach me, show this iron coin and yell out as loud as you can, Valar Morghulis. And Jaqen H'ghar leaves behind Arya. So Roose Bolton had showed up to Harrenhal, made Arya his cupbearer, and Arya intends to reveal herself to Roose Bolton. However, there's something about Roose Bolton that just kind of strikes her a little suspicious. So she continues to go about this facade that she's garlic non. And during her time at Harrenhal, she comes to learn of a potential breaking of a betrothal. Apparently there's a Frey who's not going to marry. Something about Robb Stark, a broken betrothal. Everyone's upset. And then Roose Bolton, for some weird reason, who's being particularly super chummy with the Freys all of a sudden after hearing about this broken betrothal, whatever that means, all of a sudden sends a lot of northern forces off to Duskendale in a potentially losing battle. And Arya and me as a first-time reader, when I read it for the first time, I'm like, what is going on? On a second read, I'm like, Roose Bolton, you sly, horrible man. But we'll get to that later. So Arya not trusting Roose Bolton, and Roose Bolton being all sorts of sus, sending out men to their potential death at Duskendale, being super chummy with these horrible Freys. Well, soon to be horrible Freys. Arya steals a map and a couple things from Roose Bolton's Solar, and grabs Hot Pie and Gendry, and they all run away from Harrenhal. So where? Who knows? But they know that they're just going to run away and get out of here. Up in the north, Jon, who's currently with Qhorin Halfhand, gets a surprise visit from Ygritte, who has returned with a couple of wildling friends, this time with the intention of killing Jon Snow and Qhorin Halfhand. Qhorin Halfhand previously telling Jon Snow to follow the wildlings, whatever they say. Jon Snow is like, wait, I want to be one of you wildlings. And Rattleshirt, who's currently traveling with Ygritte, is like, prove it then. Kill your fellow companion Qhorin Halfhand. So Jon Snow, having no choice, and Qhorin Halfhand, knowing that Jon has to do what he has to do, agrees to this duel. Jon Snow, with the heavy assist from Ghost, the direwolf, kills Qhorin Halfhand and agrees to join up with the wildlings and join up with Ygritte. Off in the east, which we've barely really talked about throughout this entire book, again, Daenerys doesn't really have much going on. The only thing of note, the two things of note here with Daenerys' story are that at one point Daenerys goes to the House of the Undying, this house housing these weird kind of shape-shifty individuals, know the Undying, and throughout this house Daenerys sees a lot of events that have happened throughout history, including seeing her previous brother, Rhaegar Targaryen, some of the things Rhaegar has done, kind of seeing history play out. She also sees future events, including a dead wolf with a crown on his head, that being a huge foreshadowing to the Red Wedding that happens in the next book. She sees all these events, and it's really cool on a reread, but besides that, there's really nothing else of note that happens here in Daenerys' story. The other thing being that an individual known as Arstan Whitebeard, who Jorah Mormont, who has been traveling with Daenerys Targaryen throughout this entire story, kind of half recognizes, he's like, I feel like I've seen this individual somewhere before. And Arstan, recognizing who Jorah Mormont is like, I know who you are. But saves Daenerys from being bitten by a manticore at a Karth market. And Daenerys is like, wow, I am indebted to you. And Arstan Whitebeard is like, me and my companion Strong Belwas have been sent to retrieve you, Daenerys Targaryen. We have been sent by Illyrio Mopatis to bring you back to Pentos. And Dany is like, okay, sure, whatever you say, Sir Arstan Whitebeard, sir, someone I've never met before but has saved my life for no reason. And Jorah Mormont is like, something suspicious about you, Arstan, something suspicious. So yeah, that's where Dany's story ends. But where the book really ends is off in Winterfell. These two boys, Bran and Rickon Stark, with Mira, Jojen Reed, Hodor, and Osha, their wildling protector, rise up from the crypts where they were staying at. They never ran away from Winterfell. They were at Winterfell all along. They were just staying within the crypts. Push a boulder out of the way, rise up from the crypt, and they see a burned Winterfell. But despite it being burned, they see that the stones, although broken, are still standing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where A Clash of Kings ends. Oh, that was a long one. Thanks for bearing with me throughout this entire video, guys. I really do appreciate all of your love and support. Hopefully this was a useful summary for you guys. I'm so sorry for going long again. I did not intend to go an hour, more than an hour. I'm so sorry. I hope you enjoyed it though, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll see you guys next week for a complete summary of the third book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, A Storm of Swords. The Advocate, out.